Burke's Perspectives on BCTV is supported in part by a friend of BCTV.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Burke's Perspectives. We're back. We've been on the shelf for a couple of weeks because of the way the calendar fell with the holidays and so on, and when we do our normal taping. But we're back. And as usual, there's been about a gazillion things that has happened for us to sort through. We're not going to get anywhere near through everything. Can't help but start out after wishing everybody a Happy New Year. California is unbelievable, the fires. I mean, I'm sure you've all seen some of the video. It's just horrific. And this time it's not just out in the wilderness. I mean, houses, rows of houses on fire. People losing literally everything. I mean, it's just god awful. And some of the fire hydrants are dry because they, have not particularly well managed their water out there, I guess, or whatever, with all the growth and whatnot. It is just a god-awful thing. Now, John has family out there, your son's out there, so is he telling you much of what's going on?
I heard from Martha too. Martha Richardson, her daughter is in Pasadena and had to flee the Elton fire, which made I've seen photos from on CNN. The Alameda looked like Dresden after the firebombing. I mean, these are middle class single family dwellings that are just burned to the ground. My son is out there. He apparently is out of harm's way. He's up in the mountains and kind of away from the fire. This is an urban wildfire. It's unprecedented. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. With
Just
the winds are
clarify,
blowing.
just for anybody who's a little worried about it, John meant Altadena, not Alameda, which is in the Oakland area and all that. So yeah.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. They're very similar names. I hadn't heard of Altadena except from Pasadena before. So yeah.
We knew what he was talking about.
Okay. All right. I have friends in Alameda who would be very worried.
You elitists can go talk about your
well, these are not
pronunciations
elitist parts necessarily. So.
Well, we are on the cusp of Trump 2.0, and as usual, the pot is being stirred vigorously. Lots of people that are, just can't get over this. I've never seen anything like it in political things over the years, of just the hatred that a large number of people have for this guy. I know I'm not by any means an apologist for Donald Trump, but for God's sakes, he's incoming president. I think we as Americans all ought to say, well, I didn't vote for you, but good luck. Instead, there's this.
Have you ever seen such lunacy coming out of the presidential
or even vitriol itself? I mean, this is a man who's accused people of eating pets and dogs and cats. I mean, how can you expect people to treat him differently than he treats them? Yeah. He's the president.
Because he's the president.
He has a higher standard, Fred. Joan, sorry to interrupt you. He has a higher standard that he has to live up to than the average citizen. It's BS to be calling people out for what they're saying against him when he says worse towards others. Sorry,
I'm not even talking.
At this point, though,
let Joan go here.
At this point, the people have spoken, and I think the way to look at it is this. And I am also no apologist at all for Trump, and I would never. I voted for him once and would never do that again. But on the other hand, the majority of people voted for him. The majority of voters voted for him. And I think what John Fetterman says is right. We don't want him to fail. We want him to be successful because we're all on the same ship and we don't want the ship going down. But that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be people around him, as there were in the first term, who would say no to his worst impulses, because he is very impulsive, and that's not a good character trait or quality for the leader of the free world. So what I would hope is let's end that someday the theatrics will end, the 3 a.m. tweeting, maybe this new chief of staff, who is a no-nonsense mom, can do what a Marine Corps general couldn't do, and pry that phone out of his hand and get some discipline. I'm not hopeful, but one can only hope.
But I mean, we have no indication that he is doing anything more than turning up the volume. He's talking about annexing neighboring countries.
Yeah.
You know, he's throwing fuel on his own fire for all of this. Fred, you're shaking your head, but that's what he's doing.
Somebody's got to tell the emperor he's got no clothes.
I think that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah,
I mean,
we're getting to the point where it's upside down to the point of ridiculous. I mean, that is making statements about annexing Canada as the 51st state and not ruling out military force to take back the Panama Canal. Greenland, I understand that going back to even the Bush 43 administration, there was discussion of greater influence in Greenland. I was just reading about a report that John Bolton had participated in as national security advisor on that. But there was nothing about annexing it. It was simply about greater influence because to counter China's influence in the Arctic. So that you can't bootstrap that one into the other, but it's not discussion that was unheard of. But sometimes it's not what we say, it's the way we say it.
Well, but even there, we have as much influence in Greenland as we basically need. We have a military base there. There's no reason for the United States to take Greenland on, because basically we have access to Greenland already, and we have had it for decades. We have no intentions of expanding our influence in Greenland because there's no strategic value to it.
Well, and it belongs to Denmark, which is an ally and is a member of NATO.
But even there, people misunderstand it. So Denmark is actually a federation of 3 different geographic bodies: the Faroe Islands, Greenland, and Denmark. They do not have the decisive capacity. Pennsylvania could not tell Delaware that it's being sold to Africa. So Copenhagen cannot dictate to Greenland what to do. Right. 56,000 people in Greenland are basically the ones who are going to have that choice. But Fred, you're shaking your head as if he's not saying these things. He is saying these things. At the
Continued risk of being an apologist, which I am emphatically not, I don't think that, the people that voted against Trump just hate him so much that they won't listen to reason. And the Republicans, people tend to, as I've said countless times, believe what they want to believe. But I think that I get a little bit of an understanding of the man in the sense that he is a real estate entrepreneur. And I have been a real estate broker here in Berks County for 48 years. So I understand real estate people. And what he's doing is negotiating. His tactic, whether you like it or not, you don't have to agree with it, it's a free country, is to throw a grenade in and stir the pot. And then you go from there. So what I think is possible is in Panama, there's concerns about control. It's not just a matter of taking back what we built or whatever, like Teddy Roosevelt. There's a Chinese company, and everything Chinese out in the international front is dictated by this Communist Chinese Party. There's control of the operation by Chinese countries and whether or not it would affect American shipping by either increasing the price or prohibiting or disrupting the flow of things. So there's an issue there. So he's threatening in order to get control over those things. In Greenland, the possibilities of working out a lease or something, I don't think is beyond the pale. It would benefit Denmark because they would receive money. But the reason is not just for another military base, Tom. The reason is there are abundant natural resources there, oil and gas, as well as some of the minerals that are used in batteries and all the rest. So a lease could benefit both sides. A good lease is exactly that, to benefit everybody, and
We have
Denmark would
all
get
those
money.
rare earth metals in the continental 48 right now. And the reason we're not harvesting them is because it's expensive and environmentally degradatious. Having it in Greenland, even if the ice thaws in 50 years, ain't going to help us. There's no strategic need to get those.
Well, unfortunately, as Biden exits Washington, he has again slapped more restrictions on usable American, we all own it, land, publicly owned lands. And that makes harvesting things here a lot more difficult. So there's
is correct,
reason for
because
this.
he's
The
taken
Canada
out of-
thing was just to rattle Trudeau. I mean, there's no way on earth that America is going to annex Ontario
But
or
the
something.
thing
It's
is,
not going
and
to
I'm
happen.
sorry to interrupt Joan here. I agree with you, Fred, that, well, first off, he's not really a real estate entrepreneur because he's probably lost more money in real estate than he actually
Oh,
gained.
stop it with that stuff. I
He's a
mean, you know
TV
what I'm saying. I mean, it's
He's a
the
reality
actions.
TV show entertainer. He made his money off of reality TV and being an entertainer and slapping his name on a whole bunch of things that he had no affiliation with. That's where his revenues come from. It's not been from real estate. Look at all the casinos that he's had closed down. He lost a hotel in Washington, D.C. He is not a successful businessman. He's not a
Actually, he
successful-
is. He leased his name.
inherited his
Somebody
wealth.
else ran the casino. I mean, it's just, I think we need to all take a deep breath here and get over the fact that there are half of us that despise Donald Trump and move on. There's a lot of volatility here in this country as well in the world that we don't
agree with
need.
him on things. I agree that Nord Stream 2 should have been shut down. I agree with him on several things. I'm saying that on these things, he is a one-trick pony, and before he has gotten back into office, he is doing this rattle the cage thing that you're talking about. He's trying to negotiate hard. Well, the thing is, the boy who cried wolf, how many times did he get away with it? The thing is, nobody is going to believe Donald Trump in negotiating if he starts from this position. He doesn't need to start from
You
this
don't
position.
start from the ridiculous. And there's another point here. I really don't like the he's playing chess and we're playing checkers mentality that apologizes for Trump. I know, Fred, you say you're not apologizing for Trump, but in fact, you sort of are. You're saying that he's acting as a real estate developer. He's a marketing guy. I know real estate developers. I work with them. Yes, they tend to be impulsive, and that's part of the job. And that's fine for a real estate developer. It's not fine for the leader of the free world. If Donald Trump or a future president of the United States or a current president of the United States would explain to us in the same terms that you did why we should be renegotiating the Panama Canal Treaty, which was, and sorry to say this the day of Jimmy Carter's funeral, a very bad foreign policy blunder. You never give up something of that kind of strategic importance to the control of others for the very reason you stated, because there is more Chinese influence there. It's not that Chinese are running it, but there is more influence, just like there is in the Arctic now. But you don't use bluster and threaten military action either. That type of unpredictability creates instability, and it's not good for markets, and it's simply not safe. There are things that are endearing in businessmen and endearing in real estate developers that are disastrous that are not good leadership.
Yeah, Fred, to take your analogy of the negotiator, the real estate negotiator, if you were to come to me and say, sell me your house, or I'm going to come in and smash all your windows, and my house is not for sale, is that a legitimate way to negotiate? Is that how real estate people act?
No, because what you're describing is something very, very specific. Trump is speaking in a generality here. It's not a that's not a fair comparison.
Oh, I think it's a fair comparison. I think it makes a point. I think it makes a point because he has gone to the extreme without even starting the conversation. And that's what John's saying. You know, and you wouldn't go and do that, Fred. If you had to basically secure Greenland and all that, would you necessarily be taking the tack that he is?
Probably not, but that's, we have different personalities and stuff, and his personality is one where you throw a grenade down the stairs and then you go from there. I mean, that's
Okay,
just
and in his
different.
4 years of being president, did that work?
Oh, I think he had a fair amount of successes, but that's kind of a
that
subject perhaps
strategy?
for another day.
He
Well,
he
look, we're
basically
not
got-
obviously we're not solving anything here. We're just batting back and forth, which is fun. But
I
it
think
would be
there's
a whole
of
lot
important
more.
information.
This would be
There's
a whole
of
lot more
important
fun if
information
Ruth
that
were with us.
discredit the arguments that he is making.
Well,
That China is not going to annex the Panama Canal. Do we need to do it to take control? No, we don't need to go to that stage to basically be able to control that. Greenland, we have a military sensor base there. The raw materials that are there are very, very difficult to get to. It's one reason why oil reserves in Siberia are not being tapped. I mean, there's a lot of these things that are out there that just do not make sense.
okay. What else is going on in the world? Well, down in D.C., there are, as we speak here today, Jimmy Carter is lying in state in the Capitol Rotunda. What is everybody's take on Jimmy Carter? I mean, I'll go first and make somebody mad. I think he was a lousy president, but was a very good ex-president. He did a lot of good things in the world after he left office, but his tenure in office, I think, was very below average. Who's next?
I'll go next, and I'll agree with you on that one. I too have a very mixed view about Jimmy Carter. On the one hand, he was a humanitarian. He lived his Christian faith. He didn't just talk the talk; he walked the walk, and you have to respect that. He brought Israel and Egypt together to reach the Camp David Accords, but he was overly effusive in his praise of Yasser Arafat, calling him the father of the modern Palestinian nationalist movement and a powerful symbol and a forceful advocate. And no, in fact, Arafat was a terrorist for years who wised up and came to the table. He began his presidency on a note that was very insulting to Vietnam veterans by issuing a blanket pardon of those who had left the country to dodge the draft. We talked about the Panama Canal Treaty. That was a serious foreign policy error that gave up an important strategic area in the world, and it's an important asset that was given up. But in his post-presidency, after his term, he rehabilitated himself. He remade himself, and I think the Habitat for Humanity work and the work for public health worldwide. I have tremendous respect for the work the humanitarian work that he did. But yes, policy-wise, those 4 years, we're still paying for some of those mistakes.
John had a dissenting opinion here, John.
Yeah, first off, the Panama Canal negotiations began during the Ford administration.
Mm-hmm.
And our 99-year lease was up, and it's time to renegotiate. That he negotiated with Panama and decided that it would benefit Panama to give up the canal, the ownership of canals to them. It was a bit of an albatross around our neck to have to defend it. A lot of so-called failures of his were actually due to the fact that he didn't surround himself with the best people. I mean, there were a huge number of people in his inner circle who were indicted, and some went to jail during the first years because he eschewed the Washington so-called deep state, the here again, there are parallels between Carter and Trump. He eschewed the wisdom of the bureaucrats, the professionals in Washington, and who knew what they were doing. And he brought in his own outsiders, and they were pretty much good old boys from Georgia who were very hungry for power and quickly got drunk on the power of Washington. I think what we had here was a deeply spiritual, no, intelligent man. The man was a nuclear physicist. I mean, come on. How many have we had? He was the only president that was a graduate of Annapolis, the U.S. military and naval academy. And that is, try getting into that school. When they list the top universities in the United States, academically, they leave the service academies out of it because they're so assiduous in picking only the top students. So I think that we're really under. I think history is going to be a lot kinder to him than it has been recently, because they're gonna see. We something that Trump has said. We didn't go to war at all when Carter was president. We had. I know you're going to call out the Iranian revolution and the taking of the hostages, but that was not necessarily something of our making. As a matter of fact, that was because of the fall of the Shah, and who was basically a CIA agent installed in a phony monarchy, and he was dealt this bad hand, but that wasn't. We didn't send soldiers in to take over Iran.
Tom, what's your view?
Well, I think John hit a lot on the policy side of things that I was going to kind of counter with. So my view of Carter, first off, you have to remember, you don't have to remember, I'll tell you, is that I was probably 6 when he was elected and 10 when the election with Reagan happened. So, I don't have the benefit of actually remembering too much other than people making fun of him on the school bus. And we just all did. And then as I learned more about the man, I realized this is probably one of the best people to ever have that office. I am not myself a Christian, but I believe that this is a guy who operated at on a basis that most people just could never really fully function. And not only that, I mean, man wrote probably a dozen books or something like that, and had an oil painting career and all this. He was definitely a hugely well-rounded person. He wasn't just a peanut farmer, which isn't just anyway, because he was successful at that. So I think he's a good example of a good person, an intelligent and capable person might not be the best person to lead the country. And I'll extend this olive branch to Fred from our previous discussion, is that I can see a scenario in which the biggest jerk that is in office also was one of the most successful. I do not think that is Donald Trump, and I do not think it will be Donald Trump, because I think the man has so many narcissistic qualities that interfere with his judgment. But I do not think that the office requires the highest caliber of person. And there are times when realpolitik really got Carter in the backside, and that was when he let the Shah into the U.S. for his cancer treatment, and that is what caused the final straw for the Islamist students who stormed the embassy. And I think he was doing that as he was seeing that as, he was no fan of the Shah, but he just saw it as, this is the thing that the United States does for the people it supported and all that. And so it obviously created a sequence of events that were beyond his I guess, grasp at that moment. So.
Well, we seem to have a agreement that he was a fine man, but I believe might have been in over his head as far as operating the presidency. So, but and I now let's kind of roll this over into today. So now we have Trump coming back in, and the Republican Party has control of the Senate for the first time for a while, and kept control, although it's very, 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 very close, in the United States House. Mike Johnson was reelected on the first ballot, interestingly, as Speaker. Trump has an agenda, legislation regarding the border, some economic things, and so on. There's talk about some gigantic bill, which frankly I think is a mistake, or dividing it into two separate pieces and trying to get a win before going for the whole tomato. And
Which bill are you referring to?
The reconciliation.
I see.
Yeah, the reconciliation things with the border and the economy and so on. So what do we think? I mean, is there a chance for success here? Is there going to be in-party fighting? I mean, the Democrats seem to be very unified, as usual, in opposition to many of these proposals and so on. Although I think it's interesting that John Fetterman seems to be moving into what might be considered to be Joe Manchin's former role of bringing, in his mind, some common sense to it. I think he's really... I'm impressed with him. I mean, I was appalled that he was elected initially, but I think I'm coming around to thinking he's not that bad of a guy. So
yeah, I've been impressed with his intellectual honesty, and his willing to hear both sides. He seems to really get it, and he seems to also understand where the Democrats have it wrong, where the Republicans have it wrong, and I've been favorably impressed with Fetterman too. And no, I didn't vote for him, wouldn't have, and yet it's a pleasant surprise.
Fetterman understands what he has to do to get reelected, and that's it. That's all this is. This is posturing. He has read the tea leaves. He's a smart politician. He is a smart candidate. However, I don't think he's going to knuckle under every time something really distasteful comes before the Senate. I don't. First of all, the Senate is moves like molasses. It's just slow and deliberative, and Trump's not going to be able to drive them like sled dogs, like he will try to with the House. I think that you're going to see that some votes are going to require Democratic votes in the House, and Johnson's going to have to negotiate, and he's going to have to make concessions to get those Democratic votes.
But every time he has done that in the past, the right flank of the Republican Party has threatened him to boot him.
Right, and look what happened to Kevin McCarthy for making compromises.
But we don't have Matt Gaetz anymore, so that's one change there.
You're right.
Believe me, Matt Gaetz was not the sole problem.
No,
It was for McCarthy, I think. He was the main one. I understand what Fetterman's saying in general about, we want the president to succeed because it means this nation succeed. But the thing is that we have elections because we have different ideas of what success is, and so you have to define that by policies, and people disagree on policies. So getting on board with all those things, I try and really get to the issue of what are the policies, what are the things that are going to, and where I see this, as I said before, one-trick pony running into problems is places like Honduras saying, yeah, you want to send a whole bunch of undocumented illegals back here for us to take care of that might not even be Honduran, well, we're not actually going to cooperate with the U.S. military on this. Now, who does that open a door to that the U.S. spent all the 60s, 70s, and 80s trying to keep out? The communists. So he has an ability to think to the first level on something. He does not see beyond that. He doesn't see beyond how much he can marginalize the US in the global economy. And he's continuing to do that. So he's playing one tune and one tune only. And I don't see any level of sophistication in that. I understand what Fetterman is doing, and I agree with John on this. It gives him an opportunity to disagree with Trump without looking like he's doing it just from the party basis. But the thing is that Fetterman, he's not Dr. Oz and he's not selling snake oil, so at least we can trust him on that side. So, but I think he's going to do what's right for Pennsylvania. What's different too, I have to say, is that Pennsylvania's economy is a lot more sophisticated and a lot better off than West Virginia's. In West Virginia's case, he was basically, they had a coal economy that you have a Democrat trying to protect. We don't have that situation in Pennsylvania. We have a much more diversified and sophisticated economy. So I don't think that he's going to have to walk the tightrope quite as much.
You're right. I mean, we do have everything from coal to high tech in Pennsylvania.
Well, yeah, and I would say I would choose the gas over the coal because that's the one thing where we really got it.
And natural gas and shale.
Well, let's kind of shift over to the other side and think about Joe Biden winding down. What's the panel feel about things? He's done honored some people, some of which are controversial. He's pardoned a whole bunch of people, gave a get out of jail free card practically. I mean, they're not out of jail, but they're commuted sentences, death sentences. To some pretty bad people. He blocked the U.S. steel purchase by Nippon Steel from Japan. What do you think, John?
I'll speak up as in order since I'm the only Democrat on the screen today. I'm not a big fan of Joe Biden. I'm not going to remember him based on who he pardoned in the last few weeks or months of his term. I'm going to remember him for the few things that I agreed with, and actually those three big cornerstone pieces of legislation, because I think those are actually critical to American competitiveness in the long run. I think that those are huge things. I'm not saying that they were his ideas and his ideas alone, but the fact that they happened during his presidency is a feather in his cap. I disagreed with a lot of the things that he did, from the student loan forgiveness side of things to certainly you've heard me complain about his handling of support for Ukraine. I felt it was very shallow and not sincere, and was not constructive at all. Could have done a heck of a lot more sooner, and yet he and Jake Sullivan were constantly putting on the brakes. A lot of the way he's positioned the country as far as socially created a lot more of the division in the country, I believe. I don't think that he was somebody who was working very well to actually bring people closer together and more understanding. I think that it's, I'm not going to be able to look at him in quite the same way that I looked at Jimmy Carter, and I think they're going to have kind of some of the same failings.
Well,
John? I'm sorry, Joan. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go next. What concerns me are the new regulations that he is proposing. Now, some of these will never come to be because they're in the comment period now because they were just recently proposed. I think they're going to have a lot of unintended consequences. I mean, for example, just over the weekend, the proposed regulations on tankless water heaters. Those are going to increase costs for a marginal amount of greater energy efficiency. And they're going to hurt especially individuals who live in apartment units, such as elderly and lower income. In one case, increasing with the tankless water heater, it's a non-condensing tankless water heater versus the current condensing water heater. It's going to raise the cost from about $1,000 at Home Depot to $1,800 at Home Depot by one manufacturer's estimate. I mean, that's concerning. Even the new regulation on setting maximum nicotine levels for cigarettes, I mean, which is supposed to be motherhood and apple pie. And I don't smoke. I don't condone smoking, but it's going to have the effect potentially of causing people to smoke more cigarettes because of the lowered nicotine levels, and it's going to lead to an increased number of increased commerce in black market cigarettes, including with Russian and Chinese organized crime. It's again, it's unforeseen consequences, and taking out of production for natural gas and oil drilling 625 million acres offshore. Uh, Again, our energy independence is our national security. So we're going to have to get that from someplace else. Protecting the environment is admirable, but it should not be at the cost of our security and our independence. So I'm very concerned about these last few weeks and what he's doing in these last few weeks. I mean, the pardons, the commutation of death sentences, the pardon of his son when he said he wasn't going to do that. It's almost to be expected. The awarding of the Medal of Freedom to Hillary Clinton and to George Soros, among others who were quite distinguished and not controversial, kind of just sort of a slap in the face at the end to the Americans who didn't vote for Hillary Clinton, and when she called Trump supporters a basket of deplorables, and Soros for supporting DAs like Krasner and mayors like De Blasio and Kenney. Again, I don't think that's a good way he's ending his term.
John?
None of those things bother me.
Well, and I also want to.
Perhaps you'd like to tell us why? I mean,
No, I'm just not bothered by them. The prisoner, the pardons were for those who were already out of jail, or they were commuted sentences from death sentence to life in prison without parole. So I mean, people don't believe in the death penalty. Apparently, Joe Biden doesn't, and he was gonna spare those lives. I disagree with Joan that the environment has to be protected, and I don't think that national security is involved in any of these things, because we already drill more oil and gas than any country in the world. So I don't see anybody eclipsing us in the near future. As far as finding, I don't know about the water heaters. I don't really care, to tell you the truth, because I've got a hot water heater, so I'm all right. I don't know. None of those things bother me. Pardoning his son, I do the same for my son. But I probably, if I had been a candidate for president, I probably would have lied about it too. It's not the first lie that a candidate for president has told. So none of those things bother me. He's gone. He's out. And it's a shame that he's living with such a stigma, because he's really a sad old man at this point. And goodbye, enjoy your retirement. And
I don't think he's going to make 100 like Jimmy Carter did.
No, he's not looking well. No.
I just wanted to throw it for our audience to understand, because what John said is correct. The United States is the largest producer of hydrocarbons. We're not the largest exporter, because we're actually the largest consumer. So we're not Saudi Arabia, we're not Russia in that context. But the reason we're not seeing more wells being drilled is because the price is so low. If the price goes up, we have plenty of places to drill, and we have plenty of areas to pull gas from, and we're doing that. And actually, Joe Biden has gotten a lot of criticism from the left for actually enabling a lot of the natural gas extraction that is becoming liquefied natural gas and going over to Europe to fulfill their needs from what happened from Russia. So these are not things that are limitations on our capacity to produce energy or our security anywhere into the near future that I can see.
Well, let's use that, Tom, as a segue to go over to talk about the most recent happenings in Ukraine. That agreement that was in place and was expected or designed to expire, where the natural gas that flowed from Russia through Ukraine and into Europe has ended. Russia benefited by selling the stuff. Ukraine benefited by the transportation through their territories, and Europe needed the stuff. So now that's over. And as you just said, some of it is being replaced by liquefied natural gas from here. So how do you think that will have, it was expected, so I think they probably planned out what was going to happen next. It wasn't like they just turned off the spigot one morning. How will that affect things much in your opinion?
Well, it's bringing out the political divisions with a couple of the smaller member states of the European Union, Hungary and Slovakia particularly. They're crying foul. They had all this time to prepare for it. They were really pretty much, so there was really only 3 countries that were receiving gas through that pipeline towards the end. Other nations had weaned themselves off voluntarily on that. That was Slovakia, Hungary, and Austria. Austria was not crying foul on this. For the most part, we're seeing energy concerns on stockpiles, but it's not like Europe is going to run out of gas by the end of March or something like that. So there should be plenty there to get through this winter, but it's just one of these security issues that they have to be concerned about. And one of the bigger issues that I think is interesting for folks to understand is that, and I've talked about this before, Germany turned off its nuclear reactors in reaction to Fukushima in 2011, I think it was. And it made no sense to anybody as to why they did that. And now Germany is highly dependent upon gas for production of electricity because they shut off their nuclear. They've been doing a lot of green transition, but because this winter has actually been very cloudy, which is always the case, but even more so in Northern Europe, and also very calm, very little wind, they're almost getting nothing out of windmills and solar. So Germany is in a real bind. They were supposed to be transitioning onto a hydrogen economy. I hope they give that up because basically the only hydrogen takes more energy to form than it does give out. And so it's a terrible storage of energy. You need more energy to create it than it gives out. And a lot of people say, well, you can use renewables to do that. Well, right now, renewables can't even power the grid in Germany. So Germany is importing electricity. And this is creating some knock-on effects. It's creating energy price spikes in places like Norway and Switzerland that had previously really been immune from it. So energy is going to be a huge part of Europe's future. And it's a huge part of the manufacturing base in Europe that is losing competitive advantage. So I think we're going to continue to see European manufacturing dwindling, and this is going to be a serious problem for the EU to deal with.
Do you expect that they'll restart the nukes?
Well, it takes a lot of time. I think there is one plant that they actually have been looking at doing, but the number of countries that are actually putting nuclear reactors on their plans for their future energy needs is going up pretty much on a monthly basis. France is the king of nuclear, and they're the one who's exporting electricity at large amounts and have been for a while, but even greater amounts now.
How about the war? The continued reports of, throwing drones and missiles back and forth seem to have little effect over in Russia, but the civilian losses and infrastructure, I understand that there's hardly any electricity flowing anymore.
See, that's interesting. Would you guys also, the other two, would you guys also say that that's kind of the impression you got?
Yeah.
Okay, because that is not the case. We've had probably fewer blackouts this winter than we had in the previous winter. This winter is almost no diesel generators operating like they would have been in the last 2 winters. I never quite understood why people were making such a big deal about the heat being turned off because nobody's using electricity for heating. Ukraine has actually very adequate stores of natural gas, what we just call gas here, and has replaced and is actually going to be helping out Moldova. Moldova actually is being affected by Russia's voluntarily shutting off gas to them because they have a breakaway region called Transnistria that is actually kind of a pro-Russian portion that they're trying to make those people agitated to create a stir to cause imbalance in Moldova. It's a neighboring country to the south of Ukraine. Ukraine is actually supplying Moldova with gas right now to be able to make that less of a situation for them. Ukraine is importing a huge amount of its electricity. It used to be an export, now is importing it, but we're getting it from somewhere. And there really aren't power plants for the Russians to target anymore. They can hit substations. That's what they're doing. And that is expensive. But for the most part, civilian losses are not high. I mean, basically, I've used this statistic before, but the number of deaths in Lviv during the last 3 years, let's call it 3 years, violent deaths is substantially less than a similar sized city like Pittsburgh or Oklahoma City. I mean, we're probably talking about quarter of the size of that. So no, there's really not a whole heck of a lot of, could I say, hard reasons other than on the battlefield. Russia has been taking, in 2024 has taken land, but the other thing that has to be put into context. So a lot of people cited that it has increased by 7 times over 2023, which is to really say 2023, the Russians have almost got nothing. It would take 2 more years at this pace of the 2024 for Russia just to take all of Donetsk Oblast. Okay, so just one of the oblasts that they're supposedly supposed to have held, they already had half of it after 2014. And so Donetsk Oblast is still not entirely Russian, and it would take 2 years at this pace for them to be able to do that. Again, this is a war of attrition. So each side is going to throw everything that they have at the other side, continually doing this until one side runs out. And that's what this is about. And basically, the running out is the collapsing of the Russian economy or the withdrawing of the Western support behind Ukraine. One of those two things.
Okay.
By the way, Russian losses are estimated to be over 800,000 by now. And they'll probably be at 1.25 million by the end of this year if it sustains itself. They're losing people. This is not all deaths. They're casualties on the battlefield at over 1,000 a day.
And that 1,000 a day is just still continuing?
Yep.
To this day?
Yeah, it's usually higher than like 12 to 1,500 on that basis. And I mean, it's hard to know whether or not these are factual, but there's really very little reason for them to be lying about it at this stage. But Korean losses are probably, the North Korean losses are probably in the thousands.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Any thoughts, John or Joan, on this?
Yeah, I wonder if Trump is successful in negotiating a settlement to the war, which will no doubt bring about having Ukraine having to cede territory to Russia. What would that do to Zelensky politically?
So it's a good question. First of all, so polls are showing 38% of Ukrainians are willing to give up territory, but that could often just be Crimea in their minds for a ceasefire. I think the number is actually much higher than that. I think that the surveys are actually underrating it, that if Ukrainians were given an option that the war would be over, that they would be willing to cede territory with one big issue, and that's a security guarantee. That is the only thing that Ukraine needs to have to be able to approach a negotiating table. And Putin has no desire to see that. We're nowhere near seeing an end to this fighting. It doesn't matter. People say, well, it depends on what's in the deal. I mean, the Russians have already said Trump's offers is a non-starter. So the chances that there's going to be negotiations, the war will be over within a day. He's now saying 100 days. You know, what at 100 days is going to be 300 days. I mean, he'll eventually be right because it eventually will end. But there's no reason for the Russians to stop. There's no reason yet for them to stop. They're delusional about how long they can sustain this war, but Putin was delusional from the very beginning. We can't count on this man being able to evaluate the situation honestly.
And even if there were a security guarantee, how much are the Ukrainian people willing to trust Putin?
Well, no, the security guarantee would actually be trusting the US and trusting the EU. You know, that would mean actually having bases inside Ukraine, tripwire force, much like they have in the Baltic states.
Does security require NATO membership?
It doesn't technically, but it's really hard to imagine anything short of NATO membership because, you know, why would you rewrite NATO and you know, Article 5 into a new treaty when you already have one that's working for you? So, yeah, I mean, he invaded Ukraine because it wasn't a NATO member. You know, so making a NATO member will basically end the chances of Ukraine being invaded. People misunderstand the situation with a causal relationship is there. NATO was never going to invade Russia, and Russia never believed NATO was going to invade. They just didn't want to lose control of more countries around them. And they've been doing that. Armenia is next, Georgia, all these places are falling out of the Russian sphere of influence because of economic and cultural lack. And that's it. You know, these places are looking for China, the US, EU, all these places for their prosperous future. It's not Moscow.
And NATO membership was the non-starter with Putin the whole time.
Exactly, because if they become a NATO member, then he can't take Ukraine, and that's what his goal is. His goal was never just to take some land in Ukraine. He invaded Kyiv. There were troops marching on Kyiv, and they pulled back. That was not because he wanted to take Donetsk and Luhansk. It's because he wanted to take all of Ukraine.
Yep, I agree with that. How about in the Middle East? We haven't touched on that for a couple of weeks, being
We haven't touched on anything for a couple of weeks. We've been gone.
Well, I wanted to make sure that people were paying attention. So in any event, down in the Middle East, there's still no resolution to things. There's still potential ceasefires, but not coming to fruition.
Did you folks see, sorry to interrupt you, Fred, but did you see that Lebanon does now have a new president? Did you guys see that news?
No.
No.
Okay. So the president of Lebanon is appointed by the parliament, and they've been unable to do that for 2 years because the pro-Hezbollah elements and the against Hezbollah elements have not had a majority. But given that Hezbollah has suffered so many losses and all that, the anti-Hezbollah elements have won out, and the new president of Lebanon is a U.S.-backed, Saudi Arabia-backed person. I think one of the key things he talked about doing for Lebanon is securing, I forget exactly how he said it, but securing all weapons within the boundaries or within the capacities of the state, meaning the state of Lebanon, meaning that the Lebanese military, not Hezbollah. So it sounds like he's talking about disarming Hezbollah, which is a decades-old thing. So this could be a substantial, again, it's going to take a lot of time to see, but this could be a substantial event.
Yeah, if it is achievable, I don't think that Hezbollah is going to willingly turn anything over.
But they also don't. I mean, they're in a position they haven't been in a long time. I agree. They're not going to do it willfully, but they don't have a supply route now through Syria. Mm-hmm. They don't have the military capacity that they had a year ago. So they're highly degraded. They've lost a lot of their command structure. They're in a very weakened position now. I'm not saying these are very clever people who have, and they're very passionate about what they're doing. But I do see that there's an opportunity to marginalize Hezbollah and Hamas, hopefully in the next year. And I'm hopeful. I don't know if I brought it up in December, but there was a survey of the people of Gaza, and while they blamed Israel and the United States at a high rate, they blamed Hamas at an even higher rate for the cause of the war.
I recall you did bring that up. Yeah.
Okay, and so I think that we're talking about a situation where some of this work might be paying off for a much stronger and enduring peace, where Israel might have more partners around it, like Jordan, like Egypt, like Turkey, that are not going to assault its independence and its existence.
But doesn't all the above depend upon Iran? I mean, they've been financing Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthi.
It does, but it's basically they've been able to do it relatively on the cheap because they have all of these proxies in the neighboring areas that support it, that make the logistics possible. without the logistics, they can move money, but they're not going to be able to move weapons.
Any ideas about this, John? What you expect to see happen?
Yeah, I'm wondering. I mean, you mentioned Hezbollah and Hamas in the same breath, and
only in the sense of being supported financially by Iran.
Yeah, I don't. I think the ongoing degradation of the population of Gaza is worrying, and I don't see a solution to it.
Yeah, it's
Not on the horizon, at least.
It is, but I hate to say that it's progress, but I think that Hamas is in a really, really weakened position right now, and I think that why they are still fighting and not trying to actually recover is an interesting question, because they are still carrying out attacks on Israel. I mean, people have to realize that this is still ongoing. Whether or not they're effective is the other question. So I'm hopeful because I think I see a resolve in the Israeli army. I'm not hopeful for the lives of the people there, not for the next year or two. It's going to be as awful as anything, and there's nothing that those folks did to deserve the situation they're in. But this has been going on for decades, and it's often been because no side has really tried to execute this on such a comprehensive basis in the region. And I think we're starting to see the basis of that. If Iran can actually be contained, that is going to be a huge opportunity for the rest of the region to prosper.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are going to have to wind things down for today. We're at the witching hour here. Any parting thoughts anyone has, the subjects that we haven't touched on? You've got a few seconds. Anyone?
I just had to basically really go on at it about the Trump thing because Ruth wasn't here. So I just took it on as my responsibility. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I think we'll hear more from Ruth in the future, so don't worry about that. I hope
she'll be back next week.
I want to say one thing. There was a gentleman that worked for the borough of Wyomissing for over 55 years, David Boucher. Dave started cutting grass in the park system as a kid. After serving in the Navy, became a police officer, sergeant, and then police chief. In the meantime, he was a firefighter and became the fire chief. Retired, was induced to come back to be the fire commissioner. And then our borough manager departed, and he became the borough manager for the next 15 or so years, something like that. He passed away last week. His services are tomorrow morning, or I'm sorry, Saturday morning, and was just remarkable for his devotion to the community. And
I knew Dave well, and as a journalist, and I had dealings with him as chief of police and as fire chief and as borough manager, and he's an amazing guy, a real gentleman.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real loss. But his family, I mean, was steeped in knowing everything there was about Wyomissing's founding and traditions and so on. And Dave is simply irreplaceable. So rest in peace, Dave. Thank you for your service. And thank you, panel, for your contributions today. Audience, thank you. We can't leave without thanking the audience for joining us, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Goodbye.
Burke's Perspectives on BCTV is supported in part by a friend of BCTV.